Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member? No names, just yes or no.
The moment my heels touched the polished wood floor of the banquet hall, I knew something was off. Not wrong, not broken, just off, like the fake smile a tired hostess gives you when her manager is watching. Everything looked beautiful. White candles flickered in gold holders across long tables lined with eucalyptus and blush roses. Waiters moved like chess pieces, silent and efficient. In the center of it all was my mother, gliding from guest to guest in a navy blue wrap dress, clutching a glass of Prosecco like a queen surveying her court. She spotted me, hesitated just a second too long, then motioned me over with that tight-lipped expression that always meant, "We're going to pretend everything's fine." Before I could say a word, before I even sat down, she leaned in, brushed a crumb off my shoulder that wasn't there, and whispered with a softness that chilled, "Please don't ruin Jason's big day by bringing up your news." It was a whisper made of velvet and guilt, and I felt it wrap around my throat like a scarf tied just a little too tight. She didn't ask what my news was. She knew. I had rehearsed it, practiced it, almost said it over Thanksgiving pie, over New Year's drinks, over too many late-night phone calls where I chickened out. But now that I had finally found the courage, now that I was finally showing up not as the invisible daughter, but as a woman carrying a whole damn future inside her, she wanted me to shut up and smile. I nodded. Because of course I did. I always do. Jason was beaming across the room, waving with one arm around Rachel's waist. He looked like a GQ spread, crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to show off the gym work, hair styled with that too-perfect messy look that takes 20 minutes and a bottle of product. He raised his glass to me like we were best friends. Like he hadn't forgotten my birthday last year. Like he hadn't borrowed my car for 2 weeks and returned it with a cracked bumper and no gas. Like he hadn't turned every family event into a one-man stage show where the rest of us were audience, props, or scenery. But tonight was his night. The engagement dinner. The moment our parents had apparently been dreaming of since he was in diapers. I was just the guest who knew better than to speak unless asked. The room buzzed with clinks of cutlery and fake laughter. Dad was 3 bourbons deep, retelling a story about how Jason once saved the science fair in 8th grade, the story where I actually built the volcano, but Jason took it to school and slapped his name on it. I was 10. I remember crying when Mom told me, "Let him have this one." I let him have that one. I've let him have dozens since. I pushed around my food, trying to smile when someone toasted the happy couple, trying to pretend I didn't feel the envelope in my purse pressing against my hip, the ultrasound printout folded neatly inside a card that said, "Can't wait to meet you." It was supposed to be my way of telling them. A moment, finally, that belonged to me. But it was now just another secret I was being told to swallow for the greater good of Jason's spotlight. I sipped my water. Rachel sat across from me, her face unreadable. She didn't touch her wine. Didn't say much. Her eyes flicked around the table, taking mental notes like someone watching a documentary they weren't sure how to feel about. Then, dessert arrived. Cheesecake, chocolate lava cake, those little fruit tarts my mom orders from that overpriced bakery downtown. And Rachel, perfect Rachel, cleared her throat and stood. "Before we celebrate," she said, voice steady, eyes locked on Jason, "I think you should all hear what he's been hiding." The entire table froze. Forks hovered in midair. Laughter dried up like someone had pulled the plug from the night. Jason's smile twitched. "Rach, what are you doing?" My mother's spine went rigid, one hand moving to clutch her pearls like she was in a soap opera. "Rachel, honey, maybe now isn't the..." But Rachel didn't blink. She didn't look at my mom. She kept her eyes on Jason, like they were the only 2 people in the room. "You told me we were starting fresh. You told me you were done. But I found the messages, Jason. The ones from 2 days before you proposed. You asked her if she was still down for Vegas. You said you missed her lips." Someone gasped. Maybe Aunt Karen. Or maybe it was me. Jason laughed, but it was hollow and desperate. "You're being dramatic." Rachel pulled her phone from her purse and laid it flat on the table. I screenshotted everything. The screen lit up with text bubbles. Blue and gray. Jason's name at the top. My father said, "Let's not do this here." Rachel said, "Then when, exactly? After the wedding?" "After I spent 10 years wondering if I'm crazy for feeling like something was off." My mother tried again, tone sharp now. "You're humiliating him." "No," Rachel said quietly. "He did that all by himself." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was surgical. It sliced clean through every delusion at the table, every lie we'd all politely stepped over for years. Jason's jaw clenched, but he didn't deny it again. He just stared at the screen like it might disappear if he focused hard enough. I should have felt satisfied. Vindicated. I should have leaned back and watched the fallout with smug delight. But all I felt was a strange kind of calm, the kind that comes right before a storm you've stopped running from. I hadn't said a word. And yet, somehow, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. Then I opened my mouth. And I said I wasn't going to say anything tonight, but maybe it's time. The air in the room shifted in an instant, as though someone had cracked a window and let in a storm. I hadn't planned to speak, certainly not like that, certainly not now, but something had broken inside me the moment Rachel stood up and shattered the performance we'd all been politely applauding. For years I'd watched my brother parade through our lives like a golden retriever with a crown, clumsy and entitled, but somehow adored for it. Every misstep he made was met with laughter, every mistake was quickly forgiven or, more often, buried under the family rug. And tonight was supposed to be no different. Another celebration, another round of applause, another evening where we all clinked glasses and pretended not to notice the wreckage he left in his wake. But now that the silence had been broken, not by me, ironically, but by the one person he thought was safe, I couldn't keep swallowing what I came here to say. "I wasn't going to say anything tonight," I repeated, my voice a little steadier this time, "but maybe it's time I stopped playing along." All eyes turned to me, but not the way they used to, not the distracted, half-curious glances I was used to collecting like breadcrumbs. This was something heavier, sharper. Even Jason looked up, as if surprised I still had a voice in my throat. My mother leaned in, her smile more of a grimace now, and muttered, "Emma, please. Not tonight." I looked her dead in the eye. "Then when, Mom?" "When he's caught stealing again. When someone else gets hurt. When I'm 60 and still waiting for permission to exist." No one breathed. Even the waitstaff froze, hovering at the edges of the room like ghosts. "I came here tonight ready to share something with you," I said, keeping my tone level, even as my fingers curled around the stem of my water glass. Something good. Something that mattered to me. But apparently, it wasn't the right time. Because with this family, it's never the right time unless it's about Jason. Jason made a noise, maybe a laugh, maybe a scoff, but I didn't give him the attention. He'd had more than his share. "I'm pregnant," I said, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. I did it on my own. No partner. No drama. Just me, a doctor, and months of injections, hormones, and waiting. I've known for a while. I waited to tell you because I wanted it to be special. My mother blinked at me, her face caught somewhere between disbelief and irritation. "Emma, that's big. But this dinner." "This dinner was supposed to be a celebration," I said, cutting her off with a sharpness that surprised even me. "And I'm not trying to take that away. But don't you think it's strange that the second I have something worth celebrating, I'm told to keep quiet for the sake of someone else's feelings?" My father stirred in his seat, cleared his throat, and gave a weak attempt at a smile. "We just didn't want to cause a scene." I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. "A scene? Dad, your son just got exposed for cheating on his fiancée 2 days before he proposed, and you're worried about me causing a scene." Jason stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor, and pointed a finger at Rachel. "You had no right to air that out in front of everyone. We could have talked." Rachel stayed seated, calm and deliberate, her hands folded in her lap. "I gave you a chance to be honest. I waited. I watched. And when I realized you weren't going to say a word, I decided I wasn't going to sit here and pretend anymore." She turned her gaze to me then, and for a second, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't expected, a kind of knowing, a silent agreement between women who had both been told to stay quiet for the comfort of someone else's ego. It wasn't just the texts, Rachel said, her voice dropping a note lower, like she was testing the weight of her next words. There's more. But I figured I'd start with the most immediate betrayal. Jason's face turned red, not with shame, but with fury. You don't know what you're talking about. I know what I saw, she said simply. And I know what you confessed when you thought I was asleep. That brought another wave of tension across the table, like the air pressure had shifted again. I glanced at my mother, expecting some kind of response, but she was still stuck on me on the idea that I had upstaged her son, that I dared to turn the spotlight slightly in my direction for a moment longer than she could tolerate. It's always been like this, I said quietly, almost to myself. One set of rules for Jason, another for me. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done pretending I don't see it. Rachel stood now, too, slowly and with intention. Jason didn't propose because he loved me, she said, her tone chilling. He did it because he was desperate. And I think everyone at this table deserves to know what exactly he was running from. My mother finally found her voice. Rachel, please. If you care about our family at all. Rachel didn't let her finish. That's just it. I don't care about preserving a lie anymore. The room had descended into something unrecognizable, not chaos, not shouting, but a tight, suffocating stillness. Every person at that table was suddenly forced to confront something they'd been avoiding. And at the center of it all stood two women who, for the first time, weren't interested in backing down. I watched Jason's face as he realized the night wasn't going to be saved. No amount of charm or excuses was going to make this go away. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in his shadow. Then Rachel turned to me and said, "Did you ever wonder why he rushed the proposal? Because I know the answer now. And if you want to hear it, you might want to sit down." There was something oddly intimate about the silence that followed Rachel's words, as if every person in that carefully decorated room had been suddenly made aware that the roles we had been assigned, dutiful daughter, golden boy, long-suffering fiancé, conflict-averse parents, were no longer being performed. The theater was over. No one applauded. No one spoke. No one reached for a refill of wine or laughed off the tension with an awkward joke. It was as if we had all, in our own way, been waiting for this collapse, waiting for the moment when the scaffolding of lies, omissions, and selective memory finally gave way. I didn't sit down. I stood there for a long breath, then took a step forward, slow and deliberate, feeling my pulse slow into something steady and sharp. All my life, I had been conditioned to pull back, to apologize for being too much, for being emotional, for asking for fairness, for daring to believe I deserved anything more than the crumbs that fell from Jason's feast. But tonight, as Rachel offered me the floor again with that quiet invitation, something clicked into place. Not out of rage, not out of vengeance, but clarity. "I'm not surprised he rushed the proposal," I said, my voice calm but firm, and not just directed at Rachel, but at everyone who had ever told me to lower my voice, to wait my turn, to understand the bigger picture. Jason's always been good at running from things, especially consequences. Jason groaned, loud enough for effect, and dropped into his chair with exaggerated exhaustion. "Oh my God, Emma. What is this, your big moment? You're so bitter it's embarrassing." I ignored him. I had waited too long for this to let his flailing attempts at control pull me back under. "Bitter?" I repeated, tilting my head slightly. "No, not bitter. Just done." Then I turned to our parents, who had both taken on that half-frozen look of people who know they're being implicated, but haven't yet figured out how to defend themselves. "You know what I remember about the day Jason got arrested for shoplifting? I was 15. You pulled me out of a math exam, told the school I had a family emergency, made me sit in the car for 3 hours while you talked to the police and negotiated with the store owner to keep it out of court. Then, when we got home, you told me never to bring it up again, because we need to protect Jason's future." My mother's lips parted in protest, but no sound came out. "I wasn't the one who broke the law," I said. "But I was the one who got grounded for talking back when I asked why I couldn't go to a school dance that week." Rachel looked stunned, but not skeptical. No one else at the table seemed surprised. "I've protected Jason's secrets more times than I can count," I went on. "Every time he cheated on someone and cried to me about how confused he was. Every time he borrowed money he never paid back. Every time he promised to change and never did. And every time I spoke up, I was told not to make things worse. Jason laughed again, sharp and defensive. You're seriously airing all this now? At my engagement dinner. This stopped being your engagement dinner the moment your fiancé exposed your texts, I replied, my voice cold and steady. The moment you turned it into damage control. Rachel finally spoke again, quieter now. I found out about the other girl 3 weeks ago. But I didn't say anything because I wanted to see what you'd do. I was hoping you'd come clean. That maybe you had enough respect for me to be honest before we stood in front of our families and toasted a future built on lies. She paused, then turned to my parents. And before any of you ask if this is really necessary, yes, it is. Because I don't think you realize how much you've enabled this. The word enabled hung in the air like a slow-burning accusation. My mother flinched. My father blinked slowly, like he was trying to mentally rewrite the scene into something less uncomfortable. I spoke again, more to Rachel now. You said you found out 3 weeks ago. What made you stay? She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something that wasn't composure, not rage, not sadness, but calculation. Because I knew he'd lie if confronted directly. And I knew he wouldn't delete the real truth unless he had something to hide. She reached into her purse again, pulled out a slim envelope, and slid it across the table. That's a copy of the lease for a second apartment in his name. One he's been paying for since March. 2 towns over. Jason's face turned ghost white. That's not what you think. Rachel cut him off. Save it. The landlord confirmed you're not the only tenant. My mother looked like she was about to be sick. My father leaned back in his chair, staring at the envelope like it was a loaded gun. And suddenly, everything I had rehearsed, the joy of announcing my pregnancy, the bittersweet anticipation of doing this alone, felt both completely irrelevant and completely vindicated. I had tiptoed around this family for so long, believing there was virtue in silence. But silence hadn't protected anyone, least of all me. You know what? I said, stepping back and pulling a small, carefully folded card from my purse. I had this ready for you, Mom. It's a sonogram. First trimester. I was going to give it to you with dessert. Thought maybe it would be a moment we could all celebrate. I placed it in front of her gently, like it was a final offering. But now I realize this isn't a family that celebrates anything unless it's been approved, rehearsed, and curated to make Jason look good. No one spoke. No one moved. Rachel met my eyes again. He didn't just propose because he wanted a wedding, she said. He proposed because he thought it would buy him time. Because someone at the nonprofit where we work started asking questions. And he knew he couldn't keep all his stories straight forever. I blinked. Wait, the nonprofit? She nodded. The financial officer flagged a discrepancy last month. I only put it together when I saw the payment trail. Jason stood abruptly, face flushed with fury. That's enough. But it wasn't. Not for Rachel. And not for me. Because now, the real story was finally starting to surface. And none of us knew just how deep it went. The words hung in the air like a knife suspended over a threadbare tablecloth, and for a moment, no one seemed to know where to look. Jason stood frozen at the head of the table, his mouth slightly ajar, caught somewhere between indignation and disbelief. While our mother sat as though bracing for an earthquake that had already started tearing through the foundation she spent her entire life pretending didn't have cracks. My father, ever the expert in selective hearing and chronic inaction, had begun fidgeting with the condensation ring beneath his glass, staring at it like it might hold the answer to how the night could still be salvaged. But Rachel didn't waver. She stood firm, unwavering, and not once did she break eye contact with my brother, who now looked less like the self-assured, charming man-boy we'd all been trained to worship and more like a child cornered by the truth he never imagined would catch up to him in public. I took a breath, watching this unfold not with the kind of vindictive glee I might have once imagined I'd feel, but with a strange sense of stillness, as if the chaos around me had finally aligned into something real, something honest, something that no one could walk away from pretending they hadn't seen. You stole from your job? I asked him, not because I didn't believe Rachel, but because I wanted to hear what version of reality he would try to construct this time, what words he would reach for to twist, soften, or outright erase the truth. Jason scoffed, eyes darting between me and Rachel, as if searching for the right tone, apology or defiance, charm or outrage. "It wasn't stealing," he muttered, his voice low and flat, like a student caught cheating but too arrogant to admit guilt. "It was complicated." Rachel raised an eyebrow, her hands still folded neatly in front of her, the picture of calm authority. "You submitted expense reports for travel that never happened, build the foundation for client meetings with people who don't exist, and rerouted funds from the emergency grant program into a dummy LLC you created under a fake name. If that's your definition of complicated, I'd hate to see what you consider criminal." My mother gasped, but still didn't speak. It wasn't outrage in her face, it was desperation. Desperation to keep the illusion alive. Desperation to will this into something smaller, something fixable, something we could all pretend didn't happen once the dessert plates were cleared and the wine had dulled the edges of the memory. But I wasn't about to let this dissolve into the usual cocktail of excuses and rewrites. "How long has this been going on?" I asked Rachel, my eyes locked on Jason, who had sunk back into his chair now, visibly sweating. She hesitated, then said carefully, "At least 6 months. Possibly longer." I only started digging because something about his proposal didn't feel right. He wasn't nervous, he was frantic. He was pushing the timeline. He told me he wanted to get married this summer, move, start fresh. It felt less like love and more like a man trying to outrun something. Jason barked a hollow laugh, shaking his head. "Wow. You really think I'm some kind of criminal mastermind?" "No," Rachel replied coolly. "I think you're a spoiled man who's been protected from consequences his entire life and finally realized the walls were closing in." The words landed with precision, like a surgeon making an incision deep enough to expose the rod underneath. I looked at my parents, searching their faces for any sign of recognition, any flicker of accountability, but what I saw instead was the same old fear, the fear that if they admitted the truth, even for a second, the entire story they'd built around Jason would collapse. And if that story fell apart, what were they left with? A daughter they ignored and a son they can no longer defend? I felt the sting behind my eyes again, but this time it wasn't sadness. It was clarity. "You gave him money last year," I said slowly, turning to my father. $10,000. "You told me it was for a down payment on a condo. Was that a lie too?" He shifted uncomfortably, cheeks flushing. "It was a loan." He said he needed it to get ahead. "Get ahead of what?" I asked, but I already knew. Jason didn't even try to deny it. His silence was louder than any excuse he could have given. Rachel placed another envelope on the table. "That contains emails, bank transfers, and screenshots I've already submitted to the board of directors. As of this morning, I've also spoken with a reporter at the local investigative desk. You might be able to dodge the nonprofit's disciplinary committee with the right connections, but good luck dodging public scrutiny. The story's already in motion." Jason looked up sharply, a trace of panic slipping through. "You went to the press?" "Yes," she said, without hesitation. "Because if I didn't, your family would have buried this just like they've buried everything else." My mother's voice finally cracked through. "You didn't have to humiliate him. We could have handled this privately." Rachel stared at her, blinking once, slowly. And how many women have been told that exact thing? Handle it privately, don't make waves, protect his reputation? I'm not interested in protecting men who don't deserve protection. The room fell silent again, but it was no longer the silence of shock, it was the silence of inevitability. The silence of people watching a dam break and realizing the flood can no longer be stopped. I reached for my purse, pulled out the card with the sonogram, and tucked it back inside. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't say anything. I just stood, smoothed out my dress, and turned to Rachel. "If you ever need someone to testify, I've got 2 decades of stories." She gave a single nod, not a smile, not a thank you, just a shared understanding that we were no longer women bound by silence. As I walked out of the banquet hall, the noise behind me faded. My heels clicked against the marble like punctuation marks in a chapter that was finally ending. And though I didn't know exactly what came next, I knew it would not include pretending. But Jason wasn't done, not yet. Because as the door swung shut behind me, I caught one last sentence from Rachel. I hope they were worth it, Jason. Because now, they'll know everything. The night air outside the banquet hall carried that dense, almost electric quiet that settles after a storm, not peaceful, not calm, but suspended, like the world was holding its breath to see what would happen next. I didn't rush to the car. I didn't cry in the parking lot. I didn't call a friend to debrief or scream into a steering wheel, because the anger, the grief, the twisted sense of betrayal, all of it had burned clean through me hours ago. What remained wasn't numbness either. It was something else entirely. It was the strange, almost terrifying peace that comes when there's nothing left to protect, nothing left to prove, and nothing left to hide behind. I drove home with my phone buzzing every few minutes, texts from my mother asking me to call, missed calls from my father, a message from Jason that I didn't even bother opening. I had left the card with the sonogram in my purse, but not because I regretted pulling it out in the first place. I just realized, finally, that the people I had spent my entire life trying to impress, to earn validation from, to belong to, they were never really waiting to see me. They were waiting for me to fall back in line. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I slipped off my shoes, walked barefoot across the hardwood floor into the small, quiet nursery I'd been building one piece at a time, and sat down in the rocking chair beside the crib. The moonlight spilled across the soft gray walls and caught the edge of the mobile I had hung 2 days earlier, tiny planets and stars suspended from fishing wire, spinning gently even without wind. I sat there for what must have been 20 minutes, maybe more, just breathing, just existing, just being something other than the role everyone else had cast me in. I thought about what Rachel had done, the way she had walked into that room and, with surgical precision, dismantled the web Jason had spun around her. I thought about the way she had delivered the truth, not with rage or bitterness, but with the kind of cool resolve that comes from knowing you're finally done waiting for someone else to do the right thing. I thought about the way she had looked at me, not as a bystander or a spectator, but as a co-conspirator in the slow rebellion of women reclaiming their voices after years of being told to sit down and smile. I also thought about the envelope I had passed her before I left, the one I had been carrying around for weeks, unsure if I'd ever be brave enough to use it. Inside was a copy of a report I'd commissioned months earlier, back when Jason first started dropping hints about Rachel being a little too intense or asking too many questions. Something in his voice had sent up a flag in my gut, that dismissive, careless tone he always used when someone refused to fall under his spell. I hadn't known exactly what I was looking for, but I had reached out to a contact, asked a few questions, and waited quietly while the dots began to connect. The irony was that I hadn't planned to use it. I thought, maybe foolishly, that the truth would find a way to surface without me. But truth rarely floats to the top when entire families are invested in keeping it buried. That envelope had been a kind of insurance, not against Jason's schemes, but against my own cowardice. And as I handed it to Rachel on my way out the door, I saw the understanding in her face. She didn't ask what was in it. She didn't thank me. She just tucked it into her bag like a woman who already knew that this war would be fought with more than just emotions, it would need evidence, too. My phone buzzed again, another message, this time from a number I didn't recognize. I ignored it. Whatever storm was swirling inside that banquet hall was no longer my responsibility to weather. I had spent too many years standing in the rain while Jason was handed an umbrella, a towel, and a pat on the back for surviving the storm he created. Not anymore. Later that night, as I finally climbed into bed and placed a protective hand over the barely there curve of my stomach, I felt something shift. Not a kick, not movement, not yet. But a shift inside me, as clear as any voice I'd ever heard. You're done waiting for permission. I didn't need my mother's approval or my father's attention or Jason's acknowledgement to know that what I had done was right. It hadn't been pretty, it hadn't been easy, and it certainly hadn't been the ending any of them had planned. But it was mine. And the truth, messy, uncomfortable, devastating, had finally come out into the light. I wasn't naive. I knew this wasn't the end. There would be fallout. My parents would try to stitch the family narrative back together with apologies and deflections and empty brunch invitations. Jason would spin a new version of events, perhaps frame himself as the victim of cancel culture or a vindictive ex. But I wouldn't be at the table to hear it. I wouldn't be there to make excuses for him or soften the blow. I wouldn't be the emotional janitor for a brother who had spent his life breaking things he never had to clean up. Maybe that was the final act of revenge, not exposing him, not shaming him, not tearing down his carefully crafted mask in front of the people who loved him blindly, but simply walking away. No dramatic exit, no shouting match, no slamming doors. Just absence. And the quiet satisfaction of knowing that, for once, his actions had spoken louder than my silence ever could. Because I didn't ruin his big day. I just stopped protecting it. And maybe, just maybe, that's what finally made it mine.